This is your weekly tech recap with Jamal Abbott. News and insights about the tech world in plain English. Thank you for listening. We are in episode number 15, and this episode is going to be a little bit different in that we're going to bring you some news and insights, but this is going to be the halftime report. And specifically, we're going to be focusing on the big four mobile operators. So we'll be talking about T-Mobile, Sprint, AT&T, and Verizon, and then just briefly going over how these companies are doing as they compete with one another to duke it out for our dollars. And this is something I've been wanting to do for a long time, and it's something I find really interesting is how these companies make money and what they're trying to do to win our business. So this is what this episode's all about, and we will jump right into this. So the format of the show, I will bring the numbers. So we'll talk about what they did in the first quarter and then the second quarter of this particular year. And then finally, we'll talk about the good things as well as some of the other challenges that they need to overcome to have a successful rest of the year. So just think of it as like a halftime report. So if you're into sports or anything like that, the announcers and the athletes usually have like a halftime that they have to make adjustments. And then the announcers talk about the game plan that they use initially and some of the things that they need to do to get better for the second half of the game. So this is what this show is all about for this episode. We'll start first with Verizon, and Verizon had a solid first half of the year. So for the numbers specifically, in the first quarter they made $32 billion in revenue and netted a profit of $5 billion. And for the second half of this year, they made $32.1 billion in the second quarter, as well as a net profit of $4.1 billion. The debt, they have up to $13 billion, and this has increased slightly from the last year. I'm going to jump in here real quick. I said initially $13 billion, but it's actually $113 billion. Back to the show. So some of the good things that Verizon's doing this year, so they restructured their company and they're calling this Verizon 2.0, and now they're reporting two different segments, so their consumer segment as well as their business segment. And across these two segments, that's where they bring their skills and expertise to the market. And once again, solid first half of the year, and they're projecting to finish strong with deploying 5G to 30 cities. And they continue to invest in their 4G and 5G networks, as we just mentioned. At this very moment, they're up to 10 cities deployed, and they continue to push their own fiber networks as well as introduce new edge computing technologies which supports their vision of the intelligent network. One thing that stuck out to my mind as I looked through the numbers was that they spent $8 billion on improving their network as well as the business. In addition to making and spending money, Verizon has an initiative to where they want to save some money in the process as well too. And they're doing that by having a plan to save $10 billion in cash by 2021. And up to this point, they have saved up to $4.1 billion of cash. So they're right on track with the goals that they have lined up. Now, some of the challenges. And this particular challenge is not necessarily a Verizon issue, but it's an issue across the board. And then this challenge relates to the fact that there's a decline in wireline services. So with that decline, Verizon lost 52,000 video subscribers on the consumer side of things. And we don't expect this number to really get any better. So once again, consumers today are looking at different options when it comes to TV services. So you have technologies and platforms like Hulu and Netflix. We call that over the top. And then it's with these over the top platforms, that's what's really taking consumers away from using and then consuming traditional television services. So this isn't just a Verizon issue. This is an issue that is across the board for those that are in this industry providing video, TV type services to consumers. And they're expecting this number to probably not get a whole lot better. In addition to the declines with video subscribers, there was some declines in their advertising business. So Verizon has a media component to their business. They don't really talk about this a whole lot, but they do some advertising on desktop channels and just on mobile platforms. And this is an area that they're going to have to get a little bit better. So we'll hear about AT&T here shortly, and they also have an advertising unit to their business. And then also, to wrap this up with the challenges with Verizon, some of the analysts are concerned about Verizon's ability to deliver on their promise of 5G. So at the present moment, there's a couple different strategies depending on how you're looking at things when it comes to 5G. But one of the strategies with 5G and with Spectrum is having different tiers of spectrum to deliver 5G services. So you have the low band, which is good for providing coverage, but not the super fast speeds. We have the mid band, which is the middle of the road when it comes to coverage and then speeds. And then the high band, where Verizon is currently operating at and has their 5G network deployed at, that provides the blazing fast speeds, but it's not great when it comes to coverage and does not penetrate through walls and buildings and trees and things of that nature. And the analysts are concerned that Verizon doesn't have anything beyond this high band spectrum. So we know that Verizon has an existing 4G network, but the way they're set up, they can't convert this 4G network, at least not at this time, not until some technologies and some things get moving forward with their 5G deployment. So it's going to be a little bit before we start to see some deeper coverage when it comes to Verizon, and that's where the analysts are concerned. They're looking at what AT&T is doing, they're looking at what Sprint's doing, and then as well as T-Mobile, and they're concerned that Verizon isn't doing enough when it comes to acquiring and then deploying 5G in different types of spectrum. And this is something that I'm not discounting Verizon on. You know, they're a big successful company for a reason, and they have some tricks up their sleeve is what I'm thinking that we just don't know about for the time being right now. So I'm watching this and I'm pretty confident that Verizon's going to have this issue solved. But in the meantime, Verizon continues to execute on their plan. There's nothing flashy, there's nothing sexy about what Verizon is doing, and really they remind me of the San Antonio Spurs. They get the job done, they're not flashy, they make plays, they make shots, and they win games, and that's what Verizon is doing right now. And I think it's not as exciting to look at Verizon and seeing what they're doing compared to the drama with T-Mobile and Sprint, and then some of the exciting things that AT&T is doing with their network. But Verizon is doing pretty well. Their numbers may be flat in a couple different areas, but for the most part, they're making money, they're generating money, and they're putting that money back into the business as well as taking care of expanding their network. So more to come on Verizon as they look into the second half of this year and look to get things done with their network and then finishing up with the rest of their 5G deployments. Turning our attention now to AT&T and looking at their numbers. In the first quarter, they made $44.8 billion in revenue and netted a profit of $4.1 billion. Second quarter of this year made revenues of $44.9 billion and netted a profit of $3.7 billion. Now, AT&T has the largest debt of the numbers that I've looked at for the four companies, and they are currently at $165 billion. So that's a lot, but they are down now compared to the $180 million that they initially had when they took on Time Warner, and that was a $40 billion acquisition. Now, to the good things that AT&T is doing. Solid start to the first half of the year. And one of the strengths I believe that this company has is just a diverse portfolio when it comes to making money for their company. So they have their communications business unit, and that's where the wireless comes into play, the internet services, and anything dealing with connecting people with other people. That's where they make the bulk of their revenues for the company. So that's their communications unit. In addition to the communications unit, they have Warner Media, which is the content platforms, which is the studios, which is everything that they do to produce shows and entertainment. That's another piece that's doing pretty well for them, and it's also bringing in revenue for the company. They also have a Latin America business unit, and that's where they provide services to Mexico and then other Latin American countries as far as producing communications and those types of services. So that's another business unit that's bringing in revenue. And then their Xander unit, this is their advertising platform that also adds another additional revenue stream for the company. So four diverse revenue sets, and they have a pretty broad portfolio when it comes to providing services to their customers. Now AT&T has 5G deployed in 21 different cities, and they also have their first responders network, also called FirstNet, and this is a dedicated network to public safety professionals, and they have over 750,000 connections on this network. So this is pretty good for them, and this is something that they are in the midst of getting out there. And then as this network matures, we'll probably see more first responders and then other of those other types of professionals signing up and then jumping on to this network. AT&T spent $5.5 billion on investing in their company, so that includes 5G and improving their existing network, as well as paying down $16 billion in debt. So we had talked about the fact that they had a high of $180 billion. Well, now they're down to $165. And with that debt payoff, this lines up with the initial plans that AT&T had, which is to pay off somewhere between $18 to $20 billion of debt by the end of 2019. So they're right on track with this goal, and they're moving along, and they're hitting the numbers and executing on the plan that they have set in front of them. So challenges for AT&T. So just like we talked about with Verizon, they are experiencing some troubles with their linear television service. So this is where the DirecTV, and now it's actually rebranded to be called AT&T TV. So this is where that falls into play. So this is the satellite TV service that they acquired from a couple years ago, and there's subscribers that are leaving that product that they have out there. Now AT&T has noted that there's some promotions that have expired, and that they're looking to get customers that actually want the product. So there's some folks that are looking for the best deals, and they'll jump from provider to or take on different contracts whenever there's a deal. And AT&T is focusing their attention on those subscribers that are willing to pay the dollars to get premium high content. So there's going to be some transitions with that. In addition to that, there's also the fact that they have to contend with some of these OTT platforms. Once again, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Video. So those type of platforms that they have to contend against, while these consumers weigh their options with using satellite TV or then jumping over to one of those different platforms. In addition to talking about linear TV, AT&T has their own new service coming out called HBO Max, and that's scheduled to be released in spring of 2020. And that's one of the challenges I believe that AT&T is going to have, is getting the market to accept another platform. So the real question is, will consumers jump onto this? So HBO is a well-known brand name, so that's not going to be a problem. But now they're going to have to sell the consumers on this idea that HBO Max is going to be something different and something worth taking on, especially when there's already HBO Go, especially when there's already AT&T Now, which is their rebranded DirecTV over-the-top service. So how are they going to get consumers to jump on another platform, to pay this money, and then to subscribe to another service, when you have, once again, Netflix, Hulu, and then those types of other competitors that are already out there? So that's just something that they're going to have to contend with, and it's another challenge that they may be able to overcome. but it's all about execution at this point. So spring 2020 is when HBO Max is supposed to be coming out. And then, like I mentioned earlier too, with Verizon, just overall declines to their wireline network. So this is nothing new to this phone company, but it's something that they'll have to work through as folks are getting rid of these wireline services and then transitioning to other wireless services, and then just other IP-based technologies that are new and improved and are different from the older legacy technologies that AT&T has traditionally brought to the market. Now, jumping over to T-Mobile, they've done a remarkable job this year of executing and then hitting all their numbers and all their figures. So for the first quarter, they made $11 billion and netted a profit of $908 million. Second quarter of this year, they made revenues of $10.9 billion and netted a profit of $939 million. So with T-Mobile, they have a small amount of debt compared to some of the other companies that we just mentioned, $25.2 billion. And T-Mobile's doing their part to actively get this paid off. So some of the good things that T-Mobile's doing at this time, so they set some new records this past second quarter. So low postpaid churn. So churn is the turnover for customers on their network. So if they're not satisfied, they cancel their service, they leave, and they go to another competitor. That's churn. So they're keeping this number low, and that's at 0.78%. So they had record for service revenues of $8.4 billion. And then the second quarter net income of $939 million. So that's a record for them in this particular quarter. And then total net customer adds of 1.8 million subscribers. So they're doing a great job of getting customers in and then keeping those customers happy. And that's something that AT&T and Verizon, they're not speaking about this, and they're not acknowledging T-Mobile as a threat. But if T-Mobile continues on this path, they're going to be a serious threat once other folks wake up and realize that T-Mobile is not to be played with. So this part of the year too, they've got approval to merge with Sprint with the Department of Justice. We've been reporting on the show some struggles and then just some of the different concessions that they had to make sure that this deal would actually go through. So they finally got that approved. And now they're starting to lay the foundations and the framework for 5G. So they're in 6 markets right now, and then they're putting money to the table to make sure that they're investing in spectrum and then investing in their network to support nationwide 5G service. And they're looking at next year, 2020, for this to all happen. In addition to these improvements to the network, T-Mobile has also done some different things by introducing some new products to the market. One of them was T-Vision, which is another TV type service, and it's going to be targeting folks that are looking for that premium content, that 4K resolution type of content for their home TV and then for their entertainment systems, as well as introducing a mobile banking service called T-Mobile Banking. So they're trying to do some innovative things. They're known as the disruptor in the market, and they're continuing on that trend by bringing some new and interesting items to the market. And now the challenges that T-Mobile faces. The biggest and most obvious challenge that T-Mobile is facing right now is the lawsuits that have come up to block the T-Mobile and Sprint merger. So we have several state attorney generals that have lined up and have stated that this merger isn't good for their constituents, and they're concerned that prices will be raised in the market. So until these lawsuits have been either dropped or settled, there's going to be no movement on this T-Mobile and Sprint merger. So with these delays, this is kind of slowing down the progress that T-Mobile wants to make, especially when it comes to delivering 5G on a nationwide basis. And then just to quickly recap here, the whole premise of T-Mobile and Sprint combining together is for them to become a strong number 3 in the market, and then to be able to deliver on the nationwide 5G promise. So if they can't merge and make this happen, then T-Mobile and Sprint stay separate and they have to go on completely different paths, and that might not be good for business for both companies. And we'll talk a little bit more about that with Sprint in the next section. And then with that, so if this merger doesn't go through, this is the next challenge that I'm looking at, is that ability to deploy a nationwide 5G network. So do they have the resources? Do they have the capital? Do they have the cash? I mean, T-Mobile knows what they have, but they are looking at Sprint being their best option to deliver on a full nationwide 5G network. So that's one of the challenges that they'll have to overcome in this next half of the year. And then, like I mentioned, even though T-Mobile's scrappy and even though they're putting a fight out there with AT&T and Verizon, they are still an underdog when it comes to resources. So we looked at some of the numbers with T-Mobile, and those numbers are very small in comparison to what Verizon and AT&T are doing as far as revenues and as far as net profits. So with those two other companies, they have the necessary money coming in to make the investments into the network. And what T-Mobile has compared to these other two big companies, it's not really too much of a competition when it comes to bringing money in. So T-Mobile is going to look to change that if they can get this merger approved. But in the meantime, they're going to have to work with the resources of what they have compared to these other big giants in the market. And now turning our attention to Sprint. So Sprint reports just a little bit different compared to the rest of the market here. So I'm bringing you numbers that were reported as of this calendar year. These numbers actually came from their Q4 fiscal year, which was the closeout year that they had for 2018. So for the first quarter, revenues reported in 2019, Sprint brought in revenues of $8.4 billion, but had a net loss of $2.1 billion. Second quarter revenues of $5.32 billion with a net loss of $111 million. Sprint has debts of $38 billion, and this number is growing as they are struggling right now and then trying to contend with some of the challenges. But before we talk about those challenges, we will talk about some of the good things that Sprint is doing at this current moment. So Sprint has launched 5G services to 9 markets, and they are currently the leader in coverage in the United States for 5G. So they have approximately 2,100 square miles and expects to cover approximately 11 million people in the United States. So the best coverage so far and the most widespread coverage right now with Sprint. And that's because of the fact that the mid-band spectrum that they have covers pretty well compared to the high band spectrum being deployed by T-Mobile, Verizon, and AT&T. Sprint continues to invest in their network, and they spent $1.2 billion, and that's grown from the previous year for the 4th consecutive quarter. Sprint's also leveraging some digital technologies and artificial intelligence to decrease their operating costs, as well as get some efficiencies, as well as engage in new ways with their customers. So they really have to do this type of maneuver because they're lacking the resources and the scale compared to some of the rest of the competition in the market. And now the challenges they face. As they're waiting for this merger to take place, the real question I want to know is how long they're going to be able to operate on the cash that they have on hand. The merger was expected to be closed at the second half of this year, but with some of these lawsuits that have popped up from these state attorney generals, who knows how long that's going to be able to drag out. And if this drags out for another year, how much money is Sprint going to burn through this process? And at the same time, while we're waiting for this merger to take place, the existing customer base. Now, Sprint has noted in their financial reports to the SEC that they are on a trend of losing customers, and they're trying to turn that around. But how long will these customers hang around if they know that T-Mobile is going to eventually buy this company up? So some of the customers may be jumping off, in anticipation of going over to T-Mobile. So they may be saying, hey, look, let's go ahead and just go there now. And then some of the customers might be like, you know what? I'm not too satisfied with the service. I'm not satisfied with what's going on here. I'm just going to ditch Sprint altogether and then go with somebody else. Maybe I'll go with another cheaper option. So those are some of the challenges that Sprint's trying to work through right now. And they're trying to work a game plan to prevent those customers from leaving while also being able to have enough money to operate and to continue to do business as usual. So with Sprint, they've done what they need to do with 5G. So they have 5G out in the current 9 markets that they initially lined out. And now their next move hinges on the T-Mobile deal being approved. So they're at a standstill at this moment long term. They've done everything that they need to do. They continue to operate and they continue to service their existing customers, but they're at a standstill right now with this merger being in limbo with these lawsuits that are being handed out by these specific states. So we're waiting and seeing how this is going to work out for Sprint. And then ultimately, hopefully this goes through because Sprint can't afford to be in this state of limbo for that much longer. And then if this deal doesn't go through, what does that mean for Sprint? What do they do in the long term? Well, they've already admitted that their ability to be a nationwide provider of wireless services is in jeopardy if they're not able to merge with T-Mobile, and their ability to provide 5G services is in jeopardy. So we'll see how this works out for Sprint, and it's going to be an interesting ride for Sprint as this goes along. But hopefully this deal doesn't get dragged out for too long and that they're able to get this done, because Sprint really needs this in order to be relevant in today's market. And we don't need a wireless carrier going bankrupt at this point. And I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but if you look at Sprint's numbers and if you look at how Sprint's operating, it's really in their best interest to combine and merge with T-Mobile at this point, and then not trying to operate independently without them. They can, but their ability to deliver and provide 5G services nationwide is at jeopardy if they're not able to go through with this merger with T-Mobile. All right, so that is it for this episode today. I'm so excited and so pumped to be able to share this with you. And this is something that I've been wanting to do for a long time. And I'm glad that I was able to share this here with you. So if you have any questions, if you have any comments, please let me know. You can hit me up on social media. I'm at Jamal Abbott, and I can be found on most social platforms. The favorite ones that I'm always contacted on is Quora. Super active on Instagram, but hit me up. Let me know what you think, and I will talk to you soon. Have a great day.